Ryan Nembhard, the best passer in college basketball, was not named a finalist for the Bob Cousy Award. Make it make sense.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, it is a mailbag episode today. We finally got a little bit of time. No games for the Zags for a 9-day stretch after their game against San Francisco on the 1st. Potentially going to play San Francisco again in their next game on March 10th after securing that 2 seed in the WCC tournament. So we gathered up some questions. Many of you submitted these questions on Discord. Some of them have been submitted a while ago, but we're still relevant. So we're going to toss those in here today as a reminder. If you want to get involved in Mailbag Monday, you can reach out to me on Discord, the Locked On Zags Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes. There's a spot on the Discord to submit your mailbag questions. That's the easiest way to do it. You can also reach out to me via email, andypatton013@gmail.com. You can find me on social media to ask those questions as well. We got all sorts of stuff to talk about today. We're talking about Ryan Nembhard not being a Bob Cousy finalist. We got Ismaila Diagne's recent surge, projecting the WCC tournament, discussing a Pac-12 target, Gonzaga's roster next year, all sorts of stuff. We're going to get right into it here. This first question comes from Dave OC on Instagram. That's right. There's a Locked On Zags Instagram account as well. Go follow me there if you haven't yet. Dave's question: how the heck was Ryan Nembhard not named a finalist for the Bob Cousy Award? He's the best passer in the country. Yeah, agreed. Agreed on all accounts. Here's the situation there. Ryan Nembhard was named a Bob Cousy Award watch list, semifinalist. They kind of have multiple different announcements throughout the season. There's 5 of these awards. And it's Bob Cousy for point guard, Jerry West for shooting guard, Julius Erving for small forward, Karl Malone for power forward, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for center. Did not have that in my notes. Was worried as I started that I would forget one, but we got them all covered there. Nembhard's been in the conversation for the Bob Cousy Award throughout the season. Graham Ike has been in the conversation for the Karl Malone Award. But when the 5 official finalists were named on Monday, Ryan Nembhard not among them. The player picked for the Bob Cousy Award winner will be out of the 5 finalists, who are Mark Sears from Alabama, Walter Clayton Jr. from Florida, Kam Jones at Marquette, Braden Smith at Purdue, and Zakai Ziegler at Tennessee. The argument for Nembhard would be over Zakai Ziegler. I think that's probably the most notable one. But the situation is, I guess, understandable in the sense that Nembhard is the worst scorer out of this group, not by a ton. Ziegler averages about 13 a game. Nembhard's about 11. It's not a dramatic difference. But Ryan Nembhard's the best passer out of this entire group. He's the best passer in college basketball. He's one of the best passers we've seen in college basketball in literal decades. At the end of this season, it is pretty likely that Ryan Nembhard will have among the 5 most assists in a single season in college basketball history, dating back to the early 70s when they started tracking this. That's a very reasonable expectation. He's tied for 13th right now at 310. He's got at least one more game in the WCC tournament, probably 2. He's got at least 1 game in the NCAA tournament, hopefully more than that. He's averaging 10 assists per game. So reasonably, he's got 4 games left. Even if you say he only gets 8 per game, that's 32 more. That puts him at 342. That puts him right around like 5th, 6th all time. He's having one of the best passing seasons literally in college basketball history. But the reason he is not among these top 5 is partly due to his lack of scoring. Again, he'd be the worst scorer out of any combination of these 5 players. Kam Jones is an electric scorer. He's very, very, very good scorer. He's not really a point guard, which I think there's some debate there about that kind of aspect of this, these finalists in particular. But the 3 SEC guys are on teams that are projected to be 1 seeds, or at least some combination of those 3 teams between Bama, Florida, and Tennessee. 2 of them are probably going to be 1 seeds, maybe 1, but the other ones are all going to be 2 seeds. Gonzaga's just not good enough this year. It's unfortunate that that's what it's come down to, but Ryan Nembhard it's not through no fault of his own, but he is on a team that is not as good as the other teams in this conversation, and that is why he did not make the cut as one of the finalists, even though his particular performance this year, I think, is inarguably deserving of being in this conversation. Next question here comes from Grand Chef Otto on Discord, who says, Ismail and Innocenti are emerging as bench stars late in the season. Does it help that by the time March rolls around, there won't be a lot of film on them for opponents to study secret weapons, or am I just hunting for a silver lining? That's a little bit of a silver lining for a couple of reasons. One, I think Innocenti is going to play more in the WCC and NCAA tournament than Ismaila Diagne. I think by a fairly considerable amount. Innocenti has emerged as a rotation player. I think he's played 24 minutes against San Francisco in that game on Saturday. He did not play against Santa Clara, but he played big minutes. He's played pretty much consistently 20-ish minutes per game for the last month and a half. For that reason alone, I would say no, he doesn't really fit the category of there's not enough film on him. There's enough film on Emmanuel Innocenti at this point. I mean, he's played in enough games and played enough minutes that, I mean, him emerging as a key part for Gonzaga is a great storyline this year. But unfortunately, because of the timing, I think, Randy Bennett's going to have tape on him. He already played big minutes both times they've played them. Whatever team they play in the NCAA tournament, they're going to be aware of him. They're going to be, he's not going to be the top of their chart, nor should he be, but they are going to be aware of what he is, what he can do, what he cannot do, his strengths, his weaknesses. Like, I don't think he's going to be somebody that is they're unable to scout. Diagne, they probably won't, but again, I think he's probably not going to be a big priority for these teams because he's probably not going to play that many minutes. I could be wrong about this, and frankly, I would be okay with being wrong about this, but ultimately, I would be fairly surprised if Diagne plays legitimate, anywhere approaching rotation type minutes in the WCC tournament or in the NCAA tournament. In foul situations, I think he comes in. I think there are certain matchups where maybe he gets a little bit of a run, but I would imagine it's more of like hey, you're going to get a 4-minute stretch between media timeouts while we give Braden and Graham a break, or we give Graham a break and we don't want to run Braden out there because they have too many bigs and he's going to get pushed around, or whatever it may be. But I don't think Diagne is going to play big minutes. So I don't think him not being somebody that opponents can scout is going to give Gonzaga much, maybe a tiny advantage, but I don't think it's going to be super significant. Next question here comes from Will Norton on Discord, who says, why does Few never play Ajayi and Greg together at the same time? A couple of reasons. First of all, they play the same position, and Mark Few's fairly resistant to playing guys who play the same position at the same time. Like, positionless basketball is a thing, and it has emerged, and Mark Few is, he's not super slow to adapt to that. I think he is willing to kind of look at that, but Gonzaga's system is kind of predicated on here's what the 5 does, here's what the 4 does, here's what the wings do, here's, and so I think having those two guys on the floor at the same time, they've been kind of conditioned to do certain things, and it would kind of mess up the flow offensively. I think a bit more specific explanation, you would either be playing both of them with one of the other bigs, so it would either be Graham or Braden along with Ben and Michael, or you'd be playing them at the two big positions without Graham or Ben or Braden or Ismail in the game. I don't think either of those lineups work all that well. I think if you have Graham, Ben, and Michael in the floor, you have 3 non-shooters. I know Graham's shooting percentage is good, but he's not a shooter. Michael is not a shooter. Ben was great in the last game, but he's been an inconsistent shooter. And I think your floor spacing becomes an issue. You're also asking one of those guys to consistently play defense away from the rim. It would be Michael, and he's fine at it. But I just don't think that offers you the super optimal lineup. Maybe it works against certain teams, but I can kind of see why it wasn't a priority lineup for the Zags to run. And then I just don't see very many options where Ben at the 5 and Michael at the 4 is going to serve you all that well. Graham and Braden run the floor just fine. They're great low post scorers. You don't need to have lineups without them. When the Zags have had big plotting centers who don't get up and down the floor, sometimes they'll go a little smaller to get out and transition more, but they don't need to do that because Graham and Ben and Braden are very good at doing that on their own. So I just don't see a lot of reasons why it would be advantageous to play these two guys at the same time. And considering how long it took Michael to kind of figure out what his role was, I think asking him to play a different role in the middle of the season just wasn't something that was very high on Mark Few's priority list. Final question here. The first segment comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, with Baylor sitting at 32 in the net, Indiana at 54, and Oregon State at 78, what do you think the chances are that any or all 3 of these teams move up spots so Gonzaga's quad 1 record improves? Yeah, it could happen. Baylor plays at TCU on Tuesday, then they're at home against Houston on Saturday. Both of those are quad 1 games. I think if Baylor goes 1-1 and they play Houston close, they beat TCU on the road, they play Houston close at home, That's probably enough for them to move up. But again, it depends on what other teams do around them. They only got to move up 2 spots to get to number 30, where that win for Gonzaga would become a quad 1 win. Right now it's a quad 2. Indiana's at 54. If they get in the top 50, that win becomes a quad 1 win. They are against Oregon in Eugene on Tuesday, and they play Ohio State on Saturday at home. Quad 1 and quad 2. I think they probably need to win both of them in order to move all the way up. They're actually 55th as I'm recording this now, so they have 5 spots to climb. Oregon State doesn't play until Saturday, and they'll play either Portland or Pepperdine. That's not going to move the needle for them at all. They'd have to win by 30 for them to move up at all. And then they'll play Santa Clara on Sunday if they win that game. If they play Santa Clara on Sunday and they beat them, that might be enough to climb the top 75, perhaps. But I don't think it's super likely. It's also worth pointing out that none of this matters that much. Like the difference between a 3-6 and 5-6 in the quad 1 definitely looks a lot better, but the committee and the metrics and stuff are they understand that, Baylor's right on the line and that Oregon State's right on the line. Like, it's not like it's this dramatic swing of like, oh, Baylor moved up 1 spot, so now Gonzaga's resume is 3 seed lines higher. Like, it just doesn't work like that. Like, it's maybe a slight benefit. It might make us feel better to see that the quad 1 record is 4-6 or 5-6 as opposed to 3-6, but it's not that big of a deal. I don't know that any of these teams are going to make the jump. I think Baylor maybe has the best chance to do so, but it's not something that is that important at this point in the season for the Zags. Well, the WCC tournament is once again set up to have Gonzaga versus St. Mary's Part 3 WCC championship game on Tuesday, but could somebody spoil the party? We're going to talk about that and more coming up in just a second. But first, folks, get the supplies that you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product information to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 of the top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always get to talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're still going through mailbag questions here for our Mailbag Tuesday edition of the Locked On Zags podcast. This next question comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, it looks like the WCC tourney bracket is set up for another Gonzaga St. Mary's final showdown. Who has the best chance to pull an upset? Could Santa Clara do it one more time? And will Gonzaga and USF meet again in the semifinals? Yeah, let's talk a little bit about this. We'll have a more comprehensive kind of preview conversation about the WCC tournament a little later in the week as the games get underway. But yeah, Santa Clara is lined up on the side with St. Mary's, whereas San Francisco is lined up on the side with Gonzaga. The expectation, if things go chalky, is that it'll end up being St. Mary's versus Santa Clara, 1-4, and then Gonzaga versus San Francisco, 2-3, both those games being on Monday night. And then the winners of those 2 games, again, if it were to go chalk, Gonzaga and St. Mary's would face each other on Tuesday, March 11th in Vegas for the championship. There is definitely a possibility for some goofiness, for something to change in this conversation. We've said it almost every year. Maybe this is the year. Maybe somebody kind of cracks the party, and it almost never happens. St. Mary's lining up against Santa Clara. St. Mary's dominated Santa Clara last time out. The final score ended up being fairly close, but they held them scoreless for the first 12 minutes of the second half in that game. Just a complete, it was like a 28-0 run, 26-0 run. They just dominated that entire game. Santa Clara absolutely capable of getting nuclear hot. We've seen them do it. We saw them drop 23 threes against Washington State. We saw them have a similarly incredible game against Gonzaga in Spokane, where they had 18 threes, made their first 7 in the second half. This team can get red hot. Last time they played, St. Mary's, I should say, Adama Alphabal did not play. That is a key factor. I do not think they will beat St. Mary's. I do think they will be the team. I think they'll beat Oregon State or whoever else comes out on that side. Whereas for the Gonzaga side, San Francisco should take care of either Washington State or LMU. Those are the two teams that would most likely match up with San Francisco. I think the Dons will take care of them. I think we'll get Zags Dons 3.0, and I don't think the Dons can do it. Gonzaga's played the front court is so dominant for Gonzaga that I don't see San Francisco being able to find a way to win this one. So ultimately, yeah, I do think it'll be Gonzaga St. Mary's part 3 in the WCC championship game, which leads to Jeff's next question. He says, the only other time Gonzaga was swept in the regular season by St. Mary's was 2015-16 and the 2016 WCC tournament. Gonzaga came alive and dominated. What is your confidence level towards Gonzaga doing the same thing this year, especially now that the Zags appear to be playing like they should have all season? Well, to be fair, Gonzaga started playing like they should have all season going into their last time in playing St. Mary's on senior night. They had some momentum. They played well, and then they just kind of crapped all over themselves in that game in Spokane and ended up losing. So I wouldn't say that even if Gonzaga takes care of San Francisco or whomever on Monday night and goes into that game against St. Mary's riding a 3-game winning streak, 3 quad 1 or 2 quad 1 and 1 quad 2 wins, I still don't think that that means that they'll just roll over St. Mary's. Having said that, I do think Gonzaga wins this game. I do think if this is what happens, Gonzaga wins. It is really hard to beat a team 3 times in a year. Gonzaga played this team within a possession in the final minute in Moraga. They weren't as close in Spokane because they got off to that horrendous start and just really crumbled down the stretch. But for large chunks of that game, they were very much in it as well. This is going to be a neutral site that has always favored Gonzaga in the Orleans Arena. Always. I think Gonzaga wins this game. I think they make the necessary adjustments. I think they find a way to put pressure on St. Mary's guards. I'm curious to see how the freshmen look after a long season. Mikey Lewis in particular has been a huge problem for Gonzaga, and he's a baller. He likes to step up when the moment shines the brightest, but I'm curious to see if he's capable of doing that against such a veteran-laden team in Spokane. So I do like Gonzaga's chances of winning this one. I think it's really hard to beat a team 3 times in the same year, and I don't think St. Mary's is going to be able to do it. Final question of the segment comes from Bogmeyer34 on Discord, who says, I feel like New Mexico has flown under the radar for the Pac-12. Thoughts on New Mexico? Yeah, so I'm not well-versed enough to get into all of the specifics of the legality of the conversations happening with the Pac-12 and the Mountain West right now. They are heading towards mediation later this month. It sounds like the Mountain West wants to try to negotiate some kind of deal ahead of time. They're trying to work out all the logistics and all the details on this. But right now, what I can say is the Pac-12 is not prioritizing continuing to make additions out of the Mountain West Conference. The Pac-12 does not want to turn into the Mountain West. That was never their goal. That was never what they wanted to happen. So while they did make the additions out of the Mountain West to kind of kickstart everything in Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Utah State, they didn't really want to continue down that path because ultimately then you just basically become Oregon State, Washington State, absorbing the Mountain West and adding Gonzaga. And that's not who they want to be. New Mexico would be a great addition to the Pac-12 from a men's basketball perspective. Great. They're awesome. This team this year, they're going to be an 8-9 seed. They might match up against Gonzaga in the first round. That's been a floated potential first-round matchup. Donovan Dent, probably the best point guard on the West Coast that's not Ryan Nembhard. Nelly Jr. Joseph, great. Richard Pitino, phenomenal coach. It's a great program. They're not good at football. They don't have a big media footprint. There's nothing else particularly appealing about adding New Mexico to the Pac-12 outside of their men's basketball program. I don't think it's going to happen, especially with all the lawsuits and the mediation and everything going on between these two conferences. But I do like the idea. But again, Gonzaga does not, they can't throw their weight around in the Pac-12 and get stuff done the same way that they were able to do it in the WCC. And these schools that care so much more about footprint and media and TV deals and football, obviously, they're not going to value New Mexico. And I understand that. Like, I'm not trying to say this as like complaining about what, the Oregon State's priorities are different than Gonzaga's. Yeah, of course they are. Like, of course. And that's fine. And, I think that they should be focused on what's going to be best for the conference. And if they don't view New Mexico as the team that is, then that's totally understandable. It is unfortunate because it does happen to be a team that would line up well with Gonzaga's goals and Gonzaga's needs. But again, that's why we're hearing the rumors of, St. Mary's is still in the conversation as a basketball only or a non-football member edition. And that would be in part to kind of help Gonzaga, and certainly something that San Diego State and others would really value as well. But I just don't think New Mexico really fits right now, even though they are a great basketball program. Well, who's going to lead this team next season? It's a question we haven't really addressed much, but with so many seniors leaving the program, We got to talk about it. We're going to talk about that, plus Stu Jackson's role on the selection committee and more coming up in just a second. But first, get ready to bring your favorite Zags to life. VarsityIcons.com delivers the ultimate collection of action figures that honor both current and former Zags. Varsity Icons is the premier sports collectible figure for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. Today, we're going to highlight everybody's fan favorite, Ben Gregg. Varsity Icons was started by a longtime Gonzaga Bulldogs fan who wanted to create collectible figures of everybody's all-time favorite Zags. The mission of Varsity Icons is to create figures of current and former Zags for everybody to collect and enjoy. And there's no question that Varsity Icons wanted to highlight Ben Gregg to be their first player. He has been a fan favorite since joining the Zags back in 2021. Ben exemplifies what it means to be a Gonzaga Bulldog every time he steps on the court. We are excited to create more of your favorite Zags in the future, so stay tuned. Order your Varsity Icons Ben Gregg figure today at varsityicons.com. Varsity Icons, where icons live forever. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're still going through Mailbag here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Zags podcast. Next question here comes from Adam via Gmail. Adam says, based on the limited information that's out there right now, who will be the locker room leader next year? This year, there's 2 4-year guys, Greg and Hickman, and a point guard who's putting up video game numbers that seem to be in full control of the team. I don't see who that guy is to fill those shoes next year. Yeah, I think part of the appeal for Gonzaga of having both Braden Smith, who is the transfer from Colgate, who's been sitting as a redshirt this entire season, as well as Jalen Warley, who joined the program at the semester break, so he's been with the team since January, transfer from Virginia, who played 3 years at Florida State, never actually played at Virginia after Tony Bennett's retiring, but he's three-year starter at Florida State, or a big-time contributor for them. He's a veteran guy who's going to be entering his 5th year of college, as Braden Smith will be entering his 4th year of college. They're both seniors, they're both veteran leaders, and they've both been in the system. They have not played in Gonzaga's system in real game action, but they've been in practices. They've been learning the culture, the vibes, learning from the coaching staff, learning from guys like Nembhard and Hickman and Battle and Gregg and players of that nature. I believe that both these players are capable of stepping into leadership roles. I am saying this without a ton of knowledge about their specific leadership qualities. From what I have seen in interviews with these players, from what I have seen from watching tape and watching games, I saw Jalen Warley a handful of times last year watching ACC games. I do believe they are capable of taking on kind of a lead by example sort of role. In the actual walls of the locker room, hard to say. I don't really know the specifics of how that goes down. Were Graham Ike to return, he would take on some kind of emotional leadership role. If he did not return, you still have Braden Huff, who would now be a academic senior, redshirt junior. He doesn't strike me as a big vocal leader in the same way as many others, but that doesn't mean he couldn't emerge into that role. Ben wasn't that guy, and he kind of became that guy. Dusty Stromer will be stepping into a bigger role, potentially as a junior. Again, not a player who strikes me as a big like vocal leader type, but again, perhaps these guys can kind of make, they're not going to step on toes and act like vocal leaders right now when they're not supposed to be filling that role. So we may see them kind of step into that role in time. I do think that Warley and Smith are players to really kind of keep an eye on in this conversation as people who, while we haven't seen them on the floor in a Gonzaga uniform, they have been around the program and in that culture. And I think that gives them a big advantage in terms of being able to step into a big role right away next year and potentially carry a bit of a leadership role, which is not traditional for players who haven't played in the system yet, but I think could work for those two guys because of the specific scenario of them being here a little early. Next question comes from Will Norton on Discord, who says, will Ike and Diagne be the next Broom and Cardwell? Yes, Janai Broom, Dylan Cardwell, 2 starting centers who both played big minutes for Auburn this year, the #1 team in the country. Janai Broom, potential player of the year. Him and Cooper Flagg are in that conversation right now. Cardwell plays about 20 minutes a game. He's their starting center. He's more of a defensive prospect. And to answer the question, it depends, obviously, the big factors if Ike comes back. If Ike does not come back, then we have seen the majority of any time that Ike and Diagne would spend together, which is very, very little. But if Ike were to return and Ike and Diagne were on the same team, I don't think they would play together very much. I'd be interested to see if Ike returns, you have Ike, Diagne, and Huff. Huff is ready to take a bigger role. He doesn't want to be a backup center for a 3rd year in a row. I don't blame him. I'm not saying this from any inside information other than who would want that. right? Like it's reasonable that he would want to step into a bigger role, even though he's playing decent minutes off the bench. So if EK does return, I'm curious what that means for Huff and Diagne. I don't know. I'm not speculating that necessarily means they will leave, but there's going to be a logjam at the center position if EK returns. Let's put it that way. If EK were to return and Diagne were to be taking on a bigger role, either because Huff has moved on or just for a variety of reasons, I still don't really see, I just don't think Mark Few would play these two guys together. The floor spacing becomes a big problem. And it's nice to have, and Broom's a better defender than EK. He's a better rim protector. I think he averaged like 2.5 blocks a game. That's never been EK's game. So the comparison doesn't exactly work for me. I love it. I like the idea of it. Certainly, I like the concept of Bruce Pearl's offense or system where he plays like 9 or 10 guys and everybody plays like 18 to 25 minutes a game. We've seen that work successfully at Gonzaga with EK and Huff in particular. And so I do think something like that could work. And maybe they're just splitting time and Diane's kind of more of the defensive substitution. But a handful of things would have to flow a certain direction for this to even be a concept that could work for the Zags next year. A couple more questions here. Next one comes from Jeff. Final two actually come from Jeff. He says, WCC Commissioner Stu Jackson is on the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee this year. While he will be prohibited from being in the room when the WCC teams are voted on, he will be in the room for the seeding process. How much do you think Stu Jackson's presence could help or hurt Gonzaga to get a 5 or 6 seed as opposed to a 7 or an 8 seed? I don't think it's going to have much impact at all. He's just one person who's in the room. Everybody knows his connection to the program. Everybody knows his, internal bias in that regard. I don't think that he's going to make a big impact in terms of where Gonzaga is seated. 5 or 6 feels a bit ambitious. I think a 6 seed is within the realm of possibility if Gonzaga beats San Francisco, beats St. Mary's. If those are the two games they play and they win both those games, I think a 6 seed is possible. I think a 5 seed is pretty unlikely. Granted, I would have said that last year, and they ended up getting it because of some wonkiness with BYU scheduling. But I think they're more likely going to be in the 6-7 range. I think if they lose the WCC championship, they're in the 8-9 range. And I don't think Stu Jackson's presence on the selection committee does really anything to change that at this point. Final question of the show from Jeff. He says, what are you looking forward to seeing in the women's tournament in Las Vegas? Hopefully a couple wins from the Zags. That's what I'm looking for. We've said it a handful of times on the show. The Gonzaga women are not in a position to make the NCAA tournament if they do not win the WCC championship. You got to get the automatic bid. I don't think there's an at-large bid coming out of the WCC this year. Gonzaga's gotten it in the past when they've basically ran the table all season long and then lost to Portland in the WCC championship. They didn't do that this year. They had 8 losses early in the year, while they were dealing with injuries, while they were dealing with some continuity issues, things that were understandable. But the committee's still not going to reward them with a spot in the NCAA tournament if they don't beat Portland or whoever in the WCC championship game. Portland and Gonzaga are the 2 best teams in this league. It's not particularly close. They are the 1 and 2 seeds, with Gonzaga getting the number 1 seed because they swept Portland in the regular season. Portland getting the 2 seed. They will get that triple bye. They will probably both win their respective games, and they will play each other in the WCC championship game. The team that wins that game will go to the NCAA tournament. The team that doesn't won't. It's as simple as that. It's cut and dry, 1 bid league for the women's on the women's side this year. I'm excited to see how Yvonne Ejim responds, knowing that this team backs up against the wall a little bit. She wants to play one. She didn't come back to Gonzaga to not make the NCAA tournament in her 5th and final year. She wants to do it. She's coming off a not so good final game of the regular season. I think she's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the WCC tournament. I'm very excited to see how that plays out. But ultimately, yeah, it's winning time for the Zags. You got no choice. You got to go get them done, get a pair of wins, get yourself in the big dance, see if you can make some noise there. It's going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Again, a special shout out to those everyday listeners, those of you hanging out in the Locked On College or the Locked On Zags Discord channel. Also, a reminder, you can read the written content by yours truly at athlon.com. There's a link in the show notes for all Gonzaga articles already written for today as I'm recording this. So plenty of good Gonzaga content out there for you to absorb. Thanks again, folks. We'll be back on Wednesday with another show, getting you ready for the WCC tournament as it gets closer and closer for the Zags. Until then, as always, go Zags.